Hello everybody, it's been a minute. I'm doing a video on Lumineth today, mostly because it's a faction that I personally love, and I have a beautifully painted version of it, and I'm excited about this book, honestly. Like, I was, granted, the meme has always been that Lumineth get, like, 2 tomes per edition, so we're on the way there, unless the edition ends in probably 2 years, so maybe we'll get another tome before then. Jokes aside, I mean, like, I'm just really excited, and also it's a nice contrast to have Zinj come out with, Lumineth, since they're both, like, kind of like the magic-heavy identity armies, so it's really nice to see the release on both of them at the same time, just because you kind of assume that they kind of, since they're both lore-wise magic-heavy, that maybe, like, there's a instances of them kind of like being good against each other in terms of gameplay, but I that's a lore assumption. That the actual board state is very different in reality, but it's kind of cool that they thematically did that at the same time. I will say though, while Zinj and the Lumineth book both got the same release at the same time and both got a new model, a new hero, or I guess I guess Zinj was a new hero. It wasn't just like a reskin, right? They are surprisingly major updates away from like the tome design. So when Nurgle came out, it was the first time, I think, in a long time in 4th edition, I mean maybe all of 4th edition, that a tome dropped and it was substantially like a much further direction than the index was, in terms of like just not the rules, but like in terms of army design. Like, the Nurgle book is the first time for 4th edition I can remember that like you actually had to make like very willingly designed choices in list building, because there's just a lot of things which are good to take, so there's sacrifices to be made, and the whole army feels like, like you got like packages or building blocks to build around, so you can have kind of like a smattering of that, a smattering of this, and like there's trade-offs, and like the decisions are actually feel like they're significant at the table play and how the army plays. So super great. I was really happy to see the new, kind of like, it almost feels like a completely new direction design wise. And then the Zinj and Lumineth like leaks come out, and there are, for the most part, once again, a very different divergence from the index. And what I mean by that is they had hinted at the start of the edition that a lot of the tomes would be basically releasing where the rules would be similar to the index. And there was also, like, I don't know if they ever explicitly said so on their on War Community or any of the interviews, but they were kind of like saying they were kind of stepping away from battle formations and battle traits to be like the de facto kind of where the rules are for the army. So a lot of things in 3rd, 2nd, and so forth. The War Scrolls had rules, and then but what defined how the War Scrolls performed on the table really wasn't their rules, but all of the other superfluous things around the War Scrolls. So like the battle format, your army traits, your detachment rules or battle formation rules. Like, they kind of decided how the playstyle of the army would go, and not necessarily because of the War Scrolls you picked. And then in this edition, they were like, well, no, we want you to have your rules on the War Scrolls, and then the battle formations and battle traits would be like minutia rules, that would be, not significant enough to like design whole armies around necessarily. No, it's not entirely true, but for the most part, it felt like it was an active decision they made. As we got out in 4th and the books started coming out, for the most part, they've been following that, I think, that example very clearly. But Nurgle was the first departure, in my opinion, the first true departure away from that design philosophy. Mostly because their battle trait page is like 2 pages long, if I remember correctly. It has, the battle formations have a lot of significant rules. Nurgle still has a lot of War Scroll rules. Like, everything just feels like voluminous in text, like be it, battle formation, battle trait, and so forth and so forth. It just feels like, okay, cool. Like, if one thing gets nerfed or adjusted for Nurgle, outside of point adjustments, it feels like you're okay, because like it doesn't, like, there's so much volume of rules. It's like not a big problem. Points wise, I'll go into that when I cover the Lumineth points in this episode, as well as Nurgle. in a kind of like as a contrast. But yeah, it's just like it feels like a very resilient, solid book, and super excited for it. I'm happy to see it on the table again in a very much different like archetypes and everything. Well, we'll see a lot of variations of Nurgle on the table. It won't just be like one or two builds. I do know if that will be the case for Lumineth and Tzeentch, personally, but at least I know Nurgle will be. So Tzeentch and Lumineth come out, and the books once again, a lot of rules on the battle traits, a lot of rules. And I would say arguably the battle formations also kind of decide how the army plays, and there's still a lot of rules on the War Scrolls, but I would arguably say less than the Nurgle equivalent. So for the most part, still really good. I'm glad the directions change. So I'm gonna jump in right now into and apologies, I'm gonna share some leaks of the Lumineth Battle Tome. I don't think anybody cares. I think everybody's seen them now. It's been like almost a week since they were published. And we'll go straight into the battle traits. So, like I said, there's a full page of rules here. Granted, it's only one rule. It's a pretty big one. And I love the change how they're implementing the mechanic of this. So you can think of it as Lumineth battle trait is basically 5.6.7.0 Games Workshop attempt at making the Rune system work, because they've had it they kind of introduced a similar system with Doc and then IDK, and then they did it for 4th edition with Fire Slayers, and then Doc as IDK again in a sense, and then they kind of did it with Blades of Corn. It's basically the way I describe it. It's a battle trait that is choose your own adventure system, and it's quite this is the most refined I think they've done with it, and also probably the more least complex but fun. It's complex, but it's not system. It's not complex at the table. It's complex in how you make a decision, unlike some of the other ones which were complex at the table, in how you had to resolve them across your opponents and you and so forth. So, big fan of this. I won't go too much into details of each runes. The one things that I will criticize this system with is that the rune system is maybe a little too slow in games. It's suffers the same issue when Khorne first came out, and not as much as Khorne and Blood Tithe mechanic, but it is a bit slow, and I'll explain in a second. But the biggest critique I have is it actually kind of they designed the rest of the army to be around this system, which is, like I said, a very big departure from the rest of the books I've been in 4th edition. And I think that's where I think they went too far away from that philosophy on this example. Don't get me wrong, my Lumineth is still going to be good. Has nothing to do with power level, but it is unfortunately, unlike Nurgle, and I think to an extent unlike Tzeentch, when you're designing your army for Lumineth, you are basically constrained by what narrative you're going to pick in this rune system, and we'll go into it when we explain the War Scrolls and the mechanism. But it's a really cool mechanic, but I think it hampers list designs because they try to make it as wide as variable, right? Because the way it mechanically works is every game round you're gonna pick, at the start of the battle round, you're gonna pick one of these runes, and then it's gonna apply to 2 units for an enhanced mechanic, or you're gonna apply them to 2 units based on how many times you pick this rune in your depicture, whatever your library book during the game. Now, there's a way to change the runes in the library book and so forth and so forth, but for the most part, let's just say you pick Elathi, the rune of the mountain, twice, you get to assign it to 4 units. If you picked it once, you get to assign to 2 units. And what it means to assign is you get the mechanic of it, and if you had other runes beforehand, you also get the mechanic of that rune, this enhanced mechanic based on that rune you picked. But it still only applies to limited units. So right from the get-go, to get the most value out of the rune system, you have to kind of spread your rune selection from an optimization perspective. And then to hammer it at home, they added a kind of we'll just say the Super Saiyan rune, Thalari, Rune of the Zenith, where it effectively only works. That's not true. You get +2 to cast for all heroes, but if you have 4 unique runes depicted, so this is for the most part only a turn 4 mechanic, right, onwards, you get to get the Super Saiyan like thing, which is at 4+ for the move to all your units, and then all the crit mechanics hit hit on 5s instead of 6s. That's like the Super Saiyan rune. It is like you can use it early for the +2 cast, but there is no enhanced mechanic unless you get to like 4 unique runes, which is for the most part turn 4 onward. The issue is that a lot of the army design, if you're like, let's say you want to play mostly cows or stone guards, you're kind of stuck like picking the same rune over and over, and not maybe one or twice, and you get the value of not only getting the enhanced war scroll mechanic, but you also get the 5+ ward. Like let's say we do a rune amount, you're picking it twice already. You get to give 4 units 5+ ward. That's very good. But since you didn't pick any of the other runes for the first half of the game, you don't get any of these other benefits. You just get the 5+ ward. So the game is trying to optimize you into like forcing you to potentially take other. Now there's ways to rune fix and everything, but the issue is when you pick this when you pick like Rune Mountain, if the Calligraph, for example, lets you change something in your scripture. So to say turn when you pick the Rune Mountain and you assign it to 2 units, then on turn 2 you want to do Rune the Mountain again, but you want to assign it to 4 units, but you also want to change it to the other scripture, the previous rune, so you get the enhanced effect. Well, then you would only be able to assign it to 2 units. So you're kind of shoehorned and like kind of like buffing only 2 units in the game. There is a way to get like a hero, an extra like rune effect, but for the most part you kind of shoehorn into 2 units. It's not so bad if you're playing basically maybe a Stone Guard heavy army and you're just literally like, I only care about Rune in the Mountains because the mechanics like reward me for taking this one over and over and over. So you can kind of like design like in this like mono state, but you do lose like I said, you don't get the most optimal value of this battle trait. And the issue is the book wants you to play with this battle trait. It's like where a lot of the meat and power of this comes in. So I'll give like a brief highlight of like what they all do. The Rune of Strength is basically your generic. That's like the Venari rune. We'll just call it the Venari rune. It's just pick 2 units, add 1 run and charge rolls for those 2 units. If you pick them more than once, you can give it to more unit. Not a great power at face value, but not a bad power, just not a great power. But if you had picked the Rune of the River beforehand, it gives your units +1 to rune that you picked. And that's massive because a lot of Venari units wound on 4s only, or the Venari heroes wound on 3s, so wounding on 2s is a big change. So that's in some cases, that's a very high value power. The problem is it's a turn 2 sequence, or maybe potentially turn 1 sequence of light, or we'll go into that later. Additionally, if you pick Rune of the Wind, or N, you get to shoot, charge, retreat in the same turn. Also a very powerful mechanic. But once again, enhance effect. So it's never now, it's always later. And typically in a situation like, let's say you wanted to use it turn 2, you can only ever use it on 2 units. Outside of the hero artifact thing, because you're limited to picking one other. You have to pick Rune of Wind first on turn 1. Battle round 2, you pick Valinor. It's only affecting 2 units. You can't like have it affect 4 units like rapidly. And I think that's like where the limitation of this mechanic happens. Is it's the constraint of units selection is where it becomes like a little bit like it forces the design of the army to be around like this kind of like pinnacle 2 unit situation. Or you're engaging the opponent's army with like only really 2 units at a time. So from a design perspective, it is a little bit weird. I kind of wish the pick up to X was based on the number of like runes you've depicted plus like 1 or whatever. So like if you had like if it was turn 2, you get to assign it to 3 units. If it's turn 3, you get to assign it to 4 units. Like instead of just basically like, you pick this 1 rune, you get 2. It feels a little bit slow and constrained, especially in the late game when you're basically trying to like mix match to create like a kind of like the Super Saiyan rune effect. And then you're only ever going to really like the Super Saiyan rune effect, by the way, applies to all units if you pop it. It's just that it is unfortunately like to get the full benefit, you need 4 more runes before. It's not just limited to 2. So I guess in their sense, they were hoping the Solari was like the de facto pick, but then we're going to explain into like the rules and interaction of the War Scrolls, where it ends up like it's actually like designing a list for Thalari is not very good. But anyway, So that was Valinor. Rune of the Mountain is just a 5-up ward. Stoneguard lost their native 5-up ward. The only unit I think in the book that kept its, outside of the heroes, that kept as a unique 5-up ward mechanic defensively is Blade Guards. So now you have to use the Rune of the Mountain to give Stoneguards a ward save outside of the spell, of course. And then if you have the Valinor Rune, you get to give them anti-charge +1, which is really good on Stoneguard. Having anti-charge access is very powerful for that unit. So, because it's mostly an arm unit that wants to get charged, mechanically speaking, because it's one of the slowest out of the book and so forth. So having anti-charge is actually really powerful. But once again, you have to take this other rune to get that, which means that on early game, you can really only assign it to 2 units, which once again comes down to the way you're designing armies is very constrained. If you have Rune of River, -1 to Rune as well. That's also an incredibly powerful mechanic. But, to set it up correctly, it takes too long. In the Rune of the River, very, very powerful rune, -2 to charge for enemy units within 12 inches of those targets. Very good to deter your opponents, alpha strikes on turn 1. Just, once again, downside, 3d6 charges. Still a little bit of a problem with that rune, but it's, it is a good change. It is about powerful, so I should say. The Rune of the Mountain, if you ignore modifiers to hidden rolls for attack runes. It doesn't say combat attack, it says attack, so I am under the assumption that it affects it for shooting. So if you're doing a mostly shooting army, ignoring modifiers to hit and wound is very good, especially if you're, shooting a hero that's within 12 and you're all of a sudden I don't care about your -1 to be hit. So quite powerful. The Rune of the Wind is also very powerful. This just lets you basically have an exit strategy for units. Let's say you have a bunch of shooting units like Sentinels or Ruse that don't have shooting combat, and you're going to go top of turn. You can use this. You can pop this rune, the enhance effect, to assign these 2 units that are able to move in the start of the turn sequence. So before any hero phases, and now they're free from combat, and then now they can operate like solo operators. You can also end that move in combat if you want to, which is basically a Murder Lust equivalent. But I think most of the time it's going to be used to get out of combat. There is a situation where it forces, if you have a big spreadable, let's say I'm imagining Dawn Riders or Ruse, and you're effectively kind of screening your opponent or trying to pin your opponent with position, and they're going to try to go for a double. You can kind of punish the army by moving into combat and then preventing them from really doing anything, that double potentially. That seems a lot harder to pull off because of sequencing, but the get out of combat, one is very powerful. Then we have the Rune of Wind, which is the old, I'll say the equivalent of the old Shining Company mechanic. You get 2 units, -1 to be hit, but it only works in combat. Shining Company used to work if you were out of combat, so it affected shooting attacks. Now this one is only in combat. The Valinor Rune of Strength, if you have it on top, the enhance effect is at 4-inch movement, powerful. And then the Rune of the Mountain is depicted at 5 to control score. Nice, but not super necessary in most cases. But it is all these runes sound fantastic. It's just the way mechanically the game progresses, it's a little bit problematic to do well with them. So I'm not going to go over too many things inside the tome. I'm just going to go hit the worst, the specific issues and the goodness I see out of the book. The battle formations are weirdly they pointed this Guardians and the Pilgrims, they cost points immediately when the book came out for some reason. And it's funny because I'll go into which I think the 2 best ones are. Definitely Warhost, which gives you the old lightning reaction mechanic. It's very powerful. There's also Lylor, who lets you cheat activate strike first with her and another unit with this mechanic. So that's incredibly powerful, and it doesn't cost any points. Ancient Spirits is pretty good. It basically gives you the same thing as Prismatic, the spell in Prismatic Lore, ignore the first point of damage, except it's, the focus points is your heroes. It is unfortunately weird that the timing is, because it basically doesn't work during your opponent's hero phase. So if you're playing against somebody that does a lot of chip damage in their hero phase, Zinch, it doesn't do anything. So, because you have to pick it, and then it only affects that turn. and then since you pick it during your opponent's hero phase, it's after he does all his mechanics during the hero phase. So it's like it's good. It's just like weirdly, I don't know why they timed it this way. I guess it's like it feels like purposely targeting like armies that do damage in the hero phase to be like, hey, you don't get the benefit. I mean, you could still, if you get the prismatic lore off, but then you wouldn't be playing this battle formation. This Tricks of the Light sounds really good at face value. It's just hard to pull off when most of the army is like 2 wounds and 1 wound models. It's really good for all your heroes. Like, you know, if you're playing techless, it's pretty good. Like having a techless being able to power through to safety every time, like against most targets. Unfortunately, a lot of the foot heroes are like weird, like they're only 5 wounds or 7. So, like it has value, but it's like randomly not the greatest. Like it feels weird because you have to play like a hero hammer list to like get the most value out of it. The council, scenario council, they're a big downgrade from what it used to be, which was just +1 to cast, right? For the battle trait system. Making all the spells unlimited, it seems really good, but it's not super great and useful. It only really helps you if you're playing a bunch of wizards and you're really dependent on that 5-up ward aura, and you're just trying to make sure you cast it multiple times. There isn't a lot of spells in that lore, in both lores, like because it doesn't include the prismatic lore. Prismatic lore already is unlimited on everything, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, the point is that like since you can't double up on targeting the same unit twice with any of the debuffs, even with the fact they're unlimited now, it's just like it's just literally a safety cushion for the 5-up ward prayer, sort of spell is what it feels like. So it's probably the least valuable out of all the 4 battle formations. I would rate Strike as 1 still like number 1 for sure. Then the heroic traits are fine. They're not like that. The Acolyte of the Rune is definitely like the best value for your bank because most of your mechanic of the army is around the rune system. So having the ability to assign it to a hero, like a free one to the hero, is just, you know, almost as 50% increase in value. Especially if you're only assigning to 2 units a turn, which is what I think they want you to do. So based on how they're designing this book, so like Acolyte of Ruins is very good. You know, all the other ones are hard to compare. Like the Soggy ones are still like the +2 move Soggy one is still pretty good too, but I think like you're just gonna end up sticking to Acolyte of the Rune most of the time. You know, unfortunately, I want to say like they made these artifacts interesting to take, but it's still going to be Silver Wand. Like +1 to cast instead of extra power level is still really good. So like I rather just have the +1 to cast on 1 spell or 2 spell if you have a liner with it, versus like any of the other artifacts. Like Waystone is really good, except for the fact that you have to stay in your territory when you teleport, or you have to align in your territory, which is a kind of an issue in some maps. In some maps, it's not, but mostly it just feels like it's like a not as useful as it could be in the early game. So I don't know. It's just like it's hard to argue against something that gives you +1 to cast in an army that has a lot of good spells. The manifestations, the changes are fantastic. The Twin Stones being a movement predator, you know, they can move now, so they can actually block teleports. And they can keep up your army. They also now can modify unbind rolls with their mechanic instead of just casting rolls, which is, I think, in reality, the biggest upgrade. That's the most valuable upgrade because the army doesn't feel like it needs a lot of support to cast. Like outside of like there's a bunch, you know, the reroll, the pluses, and so forth. So like. But there's no way to unbind anything better. So this is the only thing that does that. So for the most part, I think the Twin Stones are like fantastic for mostly for the unbind change. Rune Petrification did not change. The Sanctum did change a lot. It probably has a lot of utility now, but it's just like it basically, if you get to put it on the ground and then units that are in there are not targetable, it's kind of like pseudo obscuring but better. And you can only target the spell if you want to target anything inside. It's just like it. We'll see like how people use it at the table. Right now it feels good, but we'll see. Actually, it works out. It is kind of funny that you can like countercast it on your opponent's turn, and then like maybe potentially make it so like, because if it's an army that has no shooting and then it's like an MSU specific melee army, you can basically prevent like something that, like let's say you have like the Twins or the Light in the middle of it. They can't swing into that until they kill the manifestation, which is from an activation mechanic very powerful. So we'll see. It has its edge cases for sure. It's way better than it used to be for sure. Then that we'll get to the lores. The beacon of like this is the lore of Ish. Honestly, like it's probably because it's not the one with the 5-up ward spell. It's probably not going to take it very often. Like there's an argument for it if you're basically going to be taking only the stone people, stone guard and cows, and just going for like the more mountain runes. You're just spamming the mountain runes. So you're like you don't really care about like having AoE mortal wounds or sorry AoE more ward saves. But if you're trying to build army around playing multiple runes, like you're gonna need the ward save spell because your army's not that many wound count. It's everything's kind of expensive, and like you're gonna when you need the runes to pop off to do damage, it's not the ward save rune. So you're you're kind of shoehorned into taking the Lord of the Awakened Realms. And to be honest, it's the superior lore anyway because mechanically the table has two fantastic spells. Like their limited spell is very good, but elemental push is what I think where most people are going to be taking, which is just like if you cast it at one of your units that's it just gets a 5-inch movement during the hero phase, and it cannot end in combat, but it can move through combat ranges. So it means like if a unit's in combat, granted you have to cast at a -1, so you need a 7 instead of a 6 to cast it. It can move 5 inches and it can end out of combat. And since it's not a retreat, it means like the unit is fully functional for the rest of the turn. So in a sense, like this is like one of the highest value spell. And of course, then you have the ward save aura, which is now on a cast on a 7. I think before it was an 8, if I remember correctly. Anyway, it's much easier to cast now, and you still need it for sure. So, Awakened Realm was much better. I'm not gonna go over like the war scrolls. I do want to say that like the tech list changes are very good. He's arguably like actually probably the first time I can look at a god model and be like actually like you're pretty important in, like into some list design. So I think he's quite good now. And the reason why it's not really because of his mechanic themselves. It's just the fact that he from turn 2 onward you can basically add an extra rune to your library or the battle scripture, which means you get to start the sequence of events. Let's say you want to go for the Super Saiyan rune like a turn earlier, so on turn 3 instead of turn 4, and that has like rune fixing is a very good mechanic to have if you're not just trying to spam one rune, right? And so quite good. And for 640 points, I think he's a steal for the most part. Like his output went up because it's his mana attack is flat 3, and his spell is no longer bad D3. It still requires visibility, but like he went up a lot in value. He's not quite as annoying and as like as he used to be in terms of mastery, like the Unbind and all that stuff, but he's still very, very good. He also knows all the lores, which is very well, at least the lore from the book. So if you take Prismatic, he knows that one too, and then on top of that, so very good. Big change. A big fan of the new tech list. Still wish it was Tyrion, but whatever. The twins haven't really changed mechanically. I do like the fact that the sudden transportation is like it's more clarifying that it's only from combat attacks now, which was good because it was kind of silly to shoot something and then teleport them. So good changes. Total Eclipse didn't really change. I really wish this spell was just changed to just basically say the first time your opponent uses like a command ability instead of being like an 18-inch range. It creates like weird scenarios of mechanics. It's just for an 8 cast, it just feels like it's okay. It's not even it's good in some matchups, especially armies that want to recurve CPs. Like it's very valuable, but it doesn't affect the player is the issue. So I just wish it said like the first time your opponent uses a CP like a command ability instead of like units, but whatever. Because it is what it is. The new light is quite good. I think people. Oh, I should mention the twins went up 2 wounds, which is significant. The new light is actually quite good. I think you'll probably see it on the table over the Sage one quite a lot. Just because its mechanic is during the combat phase, you can have it fight. You teleport on the table to be in combat with a friend, with a unit, a friendly unit is in combat with. So he gets a lot of mobility now in the field, and it's hard to engage like a Lumineth list of like you basically have to constantly be like in the threat of being fighting the light because he basically gets a free counter charge like anyone on the table. You have to think of it that way, right? And so it's mechanically very strong, and he's still very tanky. 7 wounds, 3 up. He lost ethereal. There's no more ethereal mechanic in the book, but seven wounds, 4+ ward, and 3 up save. He's still very tanky. You know, I'll have to like manage him a bit, but like just your opponent can't just willy nilly like engage anything in your army without like thinking about, oh shit, the light won't be maybe part of the equation. So Lylor changes. She lost her shooting attack. But she, like I was explaining earlier, she's the one that lets you. Her spell gives her a strike first, and she gets +2 to the roll if she's in combat. So it's a low cast value spell, you know. And having strike first means that if you're doing the chain activate lightning reaction mechanic, as long as your opponent doesn't have any strike first mechanic as well in his army, you get to activate 2 units in the strike first phase, and if it's your turn, you get to activate 2 more units. So basically, you get the 4 unit activation, kind of elf bullshit, as some people will call it. Pardon the French, but like for the most part, it is like a very good ability. She is unfortunately like doesn't come with ward saves. It's not a big problem. We have a rune that fixes it. We have a spell that fixes it. She is kind of squishy, without that, but she's very fast, and her output on the charge is very similar to the Light of Etherion or the Twins, just because she's damage +1 on all of the basically profiles that matter. So like you don't sleep on this model. She's quite powerful. And then finally, this is where it comes down to what I was talking about earlier. One of the big gripes about the rune system is they basically started introducing these mechanics or these certain heroes that effectively kind of try to fix your rune system, but like for like limited units. So Lelior is for Veneri units only, and the way they designed it is actually kind of like a head scratcher the first time you read it. So for Lylor, for example, it basically all the Veneri units, whole even 12 of her, count as having one depiction of Aranor, the Rune of Strength, the one that gives +1 to run and charge, on their War Scroll ability. So like, there's only one Veneri unit in the book that has a War Scroll ability that benefits from having more Veneri runes, and that's the Blade Lords. So like that the first half, that paragraph is just like, I'm paying this rule for just Blade Lords, and it's kind of the same issues of the other, except for the ruse. It's kind of it's the only, like, it's like, what, why? There's no other unit that gets to benefit from this mechanic other than Blade Lord. So it feels a little lackluster. So let's ignore the first paragraph. And so the value one is in the second paragraph, which is if any of those units, those Veneri units you pick from in 12, are depict rune ability, you get like as if you had a Rune of Strength in the scripture when you assign them powers. So like, let's say I picked the 5-up ward rune on a Veneri unit, so like Blade Lords or Wardens. They get the 5-up ward and they get the anti-charge +1 Ren. Problem is, Wardens already have the anti-charge Ren mechanic, so they don't get anything. Once again, only affects Blade Lords. And the Blade Lords, we'll go to them, it affects them massively, because it basically on turn 1, if you assign the Rune of Mountain with Lylor on the table to 2 Blade Lord units, they have a 5-up ward each, even though they have a 5-up ward mechanic built into them. But you gain as long as they're whole even 12 Lylor, they gain the anti-charge, so now they bumps their rent from 1 to 2. And because they count as having been under the role of the Rune of Strength Aranor, for their War Scroll effect, they get an extra rent. So now suddenly they're rent 3 right from the get-go, and a 5-up ward. That's like literally the most value you can get out of this model outside of the strike first for this mechanic. I personally think this entire passive mechanic needs to be rewritten into a sense where the first half of the statement just says Veneri units just count as being depicted for a Rune of Strength mechanic. And it would be very powerful, but it's also an incredibly expensive unit for what it does already. It's a 250 point hero, so it's not like cheap. And it actually has value, because right now, this only affects, for the most part, Blade Lords, which is really kind of a bummer. The twins kind of get affected. No, actually they don't, unless you depict them. Like, yeah, there's just like no, like, I don't know. It just feels weird. And it's, the Veneri one was kind of a scrap mechanic. I think this should have been removed for the purposes of the War Scroll. It should have just been units whole even 12 of her Veneri units whole even 12 are they count as being depicted for the purposes of Rune of Strength. And you can even balance it to say, like, without the bonuses, the extra bonuses, unless you pick them with the depict ability. And that way, like, at least it gives the whole Veneri, like, War Scroll, like, all of them at least +1 rend in charge, and then the Blade Lords still keep their +1 rend. But like right now, it's just like this just feels like a miss, mechanically speaking, or a missed opportunity. Not like a miss, but like just a missed opportunity. So we'll go. I'm not talking about the new model. He's good. He's just your army's so point constrained. It's gonna be hard to fit him. I know this is a league, so there's kind of like all these blank pages. Talk about another like important one, the Caligrave. So, I believe the timing on this is you have to replace this rune as you depict the rune ability. And the reason that's significant and matters, I think I hinted that earlier. Let's say like I have 4 units I need to give ward saves to, or whatever rune, but I will pick the ward save rune first specifically. And it's turn 1, I did the Rune of Mountain, give it to 2 units. It's turn 2, I want to give Rune the Mountain again, but I want to assign it to 4 units. I believe because of the timing of this, you can't change the rune after you choose the 4 depict. I think you have to change it before. It's not necessarily the worst thing. To be honest, the Caligrave feels almost like a forced take in the book, just because if you're trying to go towards the Super Saiyan rune, it helps you fix that issue to get there quicker, because most of the time, like, you kind of get forced into spamming the same rune in some cases, depending on your list. So I don't know, the Caligrave feels very good, very necessary. I mean, he is a 130 point wizard, so it's not like he's cheap, but like the fact that like he fixes your rune situation. Oh, I just realized it's only once per game. Oh, that's rough. Oh, that's so rough. Oh, I'm sorry, Caligrave. Sorry, in the few 2 games I play tested, we were play testing it as once per battle round, but it's once per battle. That makes it rough. I don't know. It's still really powerful mechanic, and you still get a wizard for 130 points for the realm, the shrine, but woof. Yeah, okay. Once again, fixing runes is important, so yeah. It only because it lets you get to the end state you're looking for a rune system, but unfortunately, being once per battle feels a little bad. Now I just realized that. Sentinels are much better now because they're 130 points, even though nothing's changed about them mechanically. And to be honest, that's the right level of points for them. The ballistas, I mean, they're fine. Like, they're once per game mechanic is now like a once per turn mechanic. So that's, they're going to be more interesting. Still, like, the problem is obscuring makes like kind of static shooting units like so terrible. So I don't know if we'll see them very often. Then we'll talk about Blade Lords. Blade Lords are fantastic. They didn't change really mechanically in terms of like durability. They're one of the few units in the book that kept their defensive buffs. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the new you don't get Shining Company immediately. You don't get like all these like defensive triggers immediately. Like you kind of like you're limited to 2 units in the beginning, and you kind of build up to them. So having a unit that still starts the game with a 5-up ward is quite powerful. They lost their perfect strike mechanic, but that's okay. Mostly because, like I said, you can they can get up to multiple instances of Ren very quickly with like Lylor or the Rune of Varanor pick. Like you can get up to Ren like 3 or 4 very quickly, which is basically the equivalent of almost having straight crit mortals. And then if you run like the Rune in the Mountain like later in the game to give them the 5-up ward natively instead of depending on heroes, you can kind of get the +1. Oh no, sorry. If you convert to Rune of Varanor and you already have activated the Rune of the Mountain, you get +1 rune, so it kind of fixes their also issuing on force. They feel good. There were 300 points for 10. They're probably 20 to 40 points too expensive. But that's just a repeat, and we'll go into points in the later half. But that's just an issue of like Lumineth. There's points. Dawn Riders, what a downgrade. Holy God, they got so much worse. So Firstly, by the way, none of those Vanir units get to benefit from having Varanor and their War Scroll runes depicted unless you're Blade Lords. Once again, Light Lords mechanic, fucking Blade Lords only. Uh, the Dawn Riders, firstly, they lost a pip of save, only 4 up save now. Secondly, they only 2 attacks each when they really should be 3 attacks for this. Like, this unit just got like neutered. Like, if you're gonna change their output this much, at least keep their durability, but you didn't. So like, not only like their output is like just so bad now for the points they are. Like, they went down a lot in points, but like they're nowhere. This is like so expensive for like what they do. They don't even pin well. They don't do damage well. They don't grind well. Like, they just they're just they look cool. They're one of the coolest model, but no, that's it. And nothing. I hope somebody figures out how to use them correct, like in a way that's interesting. But like, it's insane to me that like Wind Chargers are cheaper than Dawn Riders, if I remember correctly. We'll check the points later, but like, it's crazy to me that they're cheaper than Dawn Riders. So Stone Mages change a little bit. Alright, so Stone Guard, this is what I was... So Stone Guard, much like the Blade Lords... Oh my god, my screen is so bright because of this thing. They get, if you have 2 instances of the Rune of Mountain, they get a 3 up save instead of a 4 up save. They also 1 up 1 pip of movement. Very good unit. Very cheap. Very good attack profiles. You'll probably see them quite a lot, honestly, because they're just quite efficient. And the Rune of Mountain is still one of the best rune option. Since, you know, you don't need to depend on the ward save spell, you can just, by turn 2, assign it to 4 units. 5 the heroic trait for a hero, and then all of a sudden you're good. I don't think I have Avalanor in here. I'll go back to Ruse in a second, but Avalanor does similar thing as Lylor. He gives like all the units within Stone Guard units, or whatever you meant, Arathi units, the mountain people, like an extra pip or an extra depiction of very similar mechanic, but it actually functions a lot better for them because it gets you closer to plus, like, it gets you your Stone Guards +1 save immediately if you pick the Mountain Rune turn 1 and their whole even 12 of Animal. They also, all the Battle Cows get +1 attack for each instances of the picture of the Rune of Mountains in your library. So, like, Avalor has a mechanical, like, space for why you need him. He affects the actual units in that sub-faction outside of just depicting them. So, quite good. I don't understand why the Veneri one was so limited versus like it by design. All the temple ones seemed like they're actually like had some thought and process into it. Then we'll go. So Severus does the same thing for the Hurricane keyword, and the way this matters for them is anytime one of the foxes shoots, it's only one fox. They get to move D6 and then add +2 to roll based on the number of Rune of the Wind. So if you have pick Rune of the Wind turn 1 and you have Severus, like when he rolls his D6 to move, he gets D6 +4. So it's pretty significant, speedy. It's a nice power up. The way it comes into use the most in that sense is the Hurricane Wind Chargers. They are basically, if you have 2 runes of wind, so or turn 1 within 12 of Severus, you have 6 inches to your bows, so they go from 12 to 18, which puts them, much like further away from harm's way, in a sense. So it's quite good. And the Wind Chargers changed, like they also went down in points. They lost their ability to ignore ward, but for the most part, like for the point downgrade, it's actually kind of fine because they got crit auto wounds, which means now like they benefit from like the Super Saiyan rune. Like if you do crits, they crits on 5s now, and they're 3 shots each is significant. They only damage 1. Right? You don't want shooting to be obscene, but there's an edge case where they're quite good because at least they're meant to against cavalry. They're good, and like I said, like they're just as durable as Dawn Riders. Why? They're 4 up save over 3 wounds characteristic. Like they're the exact same durability as Dawn Riders, and cheaper, and arguably like they have of course less output in combat, but their output is better in shooting. Like so, unless your opponent just sits his entire army at obscuring. Dawn Chargers are still kind of useful because they're mobile screens. That's, very tanky. And there's a bunch of mechanical ways to get them out of combat between the spell, the runes. So, there's just, the runes just feel like a much better unit in comparison. In fact, I would arguably say a lot of the Veneri units feel lackluster compared to the way the interactions and synergies interact between the elemental halves. The Hurricane Wind Mage, sadly, now the run and shoot charge mechanic only comes from him, and it's once per battle, which is probably only, to be honestly, fine. So you don't really need it as much because, like I said, like, you know, one of the tricks of the whole Fox mechanic is being able to get that extra distance anyway when they shoot, which also triggers off if you unleash hell with him. So you know, you don't really need the speed. Is basically what I'm saying. And then he still kept his the teleport spell, but now it can only affect units not in combat. There's obviously quite a few ways of like using that spell and getting out of combat before the hero phase, so it's not like the worst, but it is kind of a much harder technical spell to use now. Yeah, I'm not gonna go into everything else because the leaks, but for the most part, that's like in summary of like, I hate all the high notes and low notes. I will say that the Hurricane half and the Stone Guard half, in terms of rune mechanics, feel like they were fleshed out better because you can just kind of spam, like, you can kind of spam like one rune. Like, you're not really going for the Super Saiyan rune. Like, the Veneri army feels like it needs to go for the Super Saiyan rune, but like all the temple lists or temple halves don't feel like they have to. So the rune system is very good for them because they're not constrained. The rest of the book feels super constrained because of the rune system, in a sense, especially by list design, right? Once again, like, if you're not spamming a rune, you can only ever assign it to 2 units. So in the Veneri world, it means like you're really only buffing 2 units, and it's going to end up being 2 units of Blade Lords. The Wardens are fine. The new hero makes them slightly annoying, like slightly like tricky with the shield bash mechanic. But I'll be honest with you, like, Wardens can't fight themselves out of anything, is what it feels like, to be fair. You know, even with the extra mortal wounds from the shield bash, like, you're probably just taking Blade Lords because at least they can fight out of things. It just feels unfortunate that like the rune system doesn't benefit the Veneri half as much as it benefits the elemental half. All right, even because keep in mind, oh my god, that's so bright. I'm sorry. Let me see if I can turn that down at all. Nope. All right, well, you get to see my face with all these blemishes. Oh my god. I'm going to move it at least to a different screen. All right. So, I was explaining about one of the things, I think by design they wanted the Veneri units to benefit, like the way they get powered up, we'll say, is from the crit mortals being on 5s instead of 6s and having the extra, like, it's basically the Super Saiyan rune. The issue is without techless, you don't get there until turn 4, and that's slow for an army that has for the most part less than 120 wounds. And if you are taking techless to go for the turn 3 one, you are basically playing of like a 90 wound to 80 wound army on the table. It still feels a little slow on the game because, you know, unless your opponent plays super cagey the entire game and lets you just power up, most of your opponents know that like the weakest time for Lumineth lift is going to be turn 1 and turn 2. So they're going to jam as much as possible into that army as quickly as possible because you do not have a lot of like debuffs or defensive mechanics up from the first half of the game, and you're also dealing with like a much lower wound count than your opponent's armies typically. So like durability wise, we're like, this is not like Stormcasts have the same amount of wounds, but Stormcasts have a 3-up save. Stormcasts have potentially of spreading 5-up wards, just like Lumineth, but they start with 3-up save. Lumineth starts with a 4-up save. So for the most part, like, you do not have the same resiliency as some of these like elite armies, and your defensive mechanics really only trigger, like, you're trading output for defense. It's very hard to get the defense and the output together unless, like, actually no, there is no way to do that in that book. Like, unless you get the 5-up ward spell off, like, you don't get the -1 hit unless you do only the rune of, I believe, was it Wind? And if you're playing a Veneri style army, it's just like, well, that's not what you're trying to do, right? So, I don't know. It's just like design perspective, great for the temples, not so good for the Veneri army. Let's talk about points. So I mentioned earlier, um, I think one of the other underlying issues with the book is how things are costed. The heroes, I think, arguably are finely costed. I would probably change like some of the ones that are on the cusp of like 300 points, like Lylor twins, like are maybe like I think like fine for what they are. I would probably see them drop like 10 or 20 points, or if they just actually for Lylor just really rewrite this like mechanic to be a little bit more interesting for Veneri units. It feels very lackluster, unlike the other temples. Um, but the all the other characters, like for the most part, all the level 1 wizards are probably 20 to 30 points too expensive at the table. Like they try to make the Cathlar interesting, uh, but once again, a visibility requirement and a 3-up roll, just like for no CP for turning off command abilities, it's not like it's a lot of points for a level 1 wizard to do that. Like, I mean, maybe I'm jaded because I'm used to playing into with like Soul Reapers lately, and those things are 90-point wizards that also buffs your units, buff your and debuff your opponent's army at the same time with no rolls required, except for the casting roll. Actually, no, they still do. Like, I don't know. It's insane to me. Like these wizards are so expensive for them. The like, yeah, they're just too expensive. I think the only one that's probably like even like well priced is the Enlightener. Every one of the other like Scenari wizards are just too expensive for what they do at the table. The Banner Blade is also kind of weirdly expensive. Rallying combat is nice, but he doesn't do anything outside of that, so it's a very expensive hero to take for just able to rally. If it was just a flat D3 like wound like healed mechanic, like kind of like the Banner from Stormcast, it'd actually be more interesting because it helps you deal with disease mechanically. By the way, disease is going to be a real problem for Lumineth. Holy shit. So like, yeah, I just the fact that it just does combat rally, it's like it's good, but it's also not really necessary. Like you don't have enough. A lot of your units are very like I said, not wound dense, so you get in situations where like you either get overrun or you don't, right? Because you don't if your opponent just jams on you, like you don't have enough defensive auras to like engage a prolonged combat. Like the Banner Blade would be cool, like if you have a block of 20 Wardens, but then you're also spending probably the 110 points for the Veneri Lord region, and then there you go, you got 500 points or 490 points of your army, basically tied up in like this package will say. But 20 Wardens on their own like just doesn't feel like it puts any real pressure. It just takes space, and that's okay. That's a value on its own. But like for 500 points, like yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. For the most part, like I said, the heroes feel properly priced, except for the Scenari like rank 1 casters. I think they probably all need to come down. They just feel like too expensive. What else? The units. Okay, yeah. So let's see. I want to make sure I was right. The Dawn Riders are 180, and the Hurricane are 160. That's criminal. That's so criminal. Oh my god, it's not even fair. I would arguably say Dawn Riders need to be like 150. Like they need to be cheaper than Wind Chargers. They don't do anything. They look adorable at the table and wonderful, and they can maybe pin an opponent for like a turn, but their output is so lackluster. Blade Lords are. My issue with Blade Lords is that they're quite possibly one of the better unit in the book. Outside of Stone Guards, but they feel properly priced. It's just in light that the rest of the Veneri stuff is like immediately like doesn't benefit a lot from synergies. Like it feels like this unit is going to go up in points because people are taking it the most. If you're taking like a Veneri unit, and it's just like that's I think is a problem right at the gate. Like I don't know. It's probably going to be a problem if they go up in points. The Sentinels obviously are great now. They're so much cheaper. It's just like we're in an edition where like static shooting is just not that interesting or very good. Too much obscuring, too much like passive, and once again it's just you need to be able to like go do things on the table to win games, and Like, it's interesting to have a unit that shoots that, that is shooting like that, but like it's rarely like, if you only buy 10, it just doesn't feel like points well spent. It almost always feels like you have to buy 20, a block of 20, and then like it's a 280 points into a unit that really gets shut down by armies that like, or by table matches that have like a bunch of obscuring. So it's just, I want them to be good. I just think there's just too much obscuring right now in the game for them. They're too static. If they were like a combat, like wind chargers at least have the same issue, but they're fast, they're mobile, they can do things on points. They can still charge and pin units. Like, they have a job at the table outside of just sending and shooting, or being a deck chair unit, right? So it's just, they're just rough for the points. Maybe next edition or next GHB, when they decide to like undo some of their obscuring crime, you might see them more on the table. We didn't talk about Riverblades. Riverblades have mechanically changed. I believe they went down 1 attack, which is fine. Like, that's not their job. It wasn't to be like damaging. It was like to be helping you do points, get points, get in corners, stop things, like, and they went down in points. So great, more value to them. So Riverblades are good. They're also, funnily enough, like kind of annoying with the Rune of River, which is you subtract charge. You can pick them for the problem. Once again, you're not going to pick them because you're so Rune economy starved in the first half of the game. But if you did pick them and teleport them, you can kind of like be annoying for your opponent for charge situations. It's just they're ineffective like mid screen if you're trying to like. If you're forced to do like go first and it's just like have a speed bump, they're kind of annoying. But like, you're not picking them for a Rune. The Rune economy is so harsh. And yeah, I like the fact they made the terrain free now, because I always hate when they put points on faction terrain. It's like, okay, but like, I don't, why? Sorry, Games Workshop. If there is a problem with faction terrain, rewrite the rule. Don't make it cost points. Like, that's the issue, not the fact that it exists. Silver Wand going down to 0 is also a good change, especially like, now it's no longer an extra power level. Yeah, I'm still shocked about that they haven't made the what's it called, the prismatic lore free. I think at this point it's competing way too much with the other lores. This ROR, we haven't talked about it, but the Sigil Convocation ROR is probably going to see a lot of play. And even if it doesn't, it's still criminally undercosted for what it does. You get to basically get the entire lore of Lumineth plus your whatever lore you pick. And this Caligrave gets you a 12-inch aura of stopping, ignoring spells cast on units on a 4-up. And additionally, he gets to teleport to friendly manifestations. That includes manifestations that you summon that are not from these 3 lores. So, like, for me, I was like, the obvious place, because I've played Firestars for them, it's, my love. It's like, it feels great. They're basically, it's an Obsidian icon that with a teleportation mechanic and a wizard. So an extra unbind and cast, right? So, and having the Rune of Petrification with the, there's not an argument for like the Rune plus like the wall. You can actually do some decent, okay, like potential mortal wounds to things. I don't know. The aura is like criminal. It feels like every time in the book we get like an aura that just feels like too good for its points. But yeah, like comparison to Nurgle, that's why I mentioned this earlier. Like the Lumineth book, like Nurgle feels like the reason why it's good is because you can take so many kind of packages because things are cheap enough to do that, and you get like just a volume of rules on the table. Lumineth doesn't get that. Everything's too kind of expensive to get a nice volume of rules. Like I said, you're not looking at like 140 winless or 160 winless. You're looking at 90 to 120. And there's just not enough, like, the points are just, I'll just be honest, it's not the heroes that's the problem. It's the units. The units are just too expensive. They're just too expensive. Like, the wardens shouldn't even be 120. They should be 100. Like, what's the difference between 10 wardens and 10 shoot spearmen? Like, the shoot spearmen do things passively on the table. The sword do things on the table. Wardens, they just exist. That's the problem. So the fact that you're paying 120, like so here's the thing, and this is like a traditional Games Workshop, I think, logic. They baked in the cost of the rune system in these war scrolls. The issue is the Veneri units do not benefit really from the rune system until like turn 4. Like, we'll just say this in the way where it makes sense to charge them for it. So why are they so expensive? Like, you should not be baking in the price of your battle format, like your battle traits, into like units like that. It just, wardens are too expensive by 20 points. Sentinels are still too expensive by 10 points. Dawn Riders are too expensive by, we'll just say, 40 points. They're so bad for 180. I don't know why the Star Shard went up. Like, okay, like, it's why? It's, keep it at 190 points. It's not like it was doing anything before. And like the Wind Chargers, I would argue maybe are the only war scroll in there that I would say like, that's probably priced correctly. Yeah, but they arguably should go down to 140 as well. Stone Guard should be 120, 110. The like, it's not to offset the rune mechanic, guys. It's just the fact that like your heroes, which do all of the work really for the army and making it like cohesive and functional, are already incredibly expensive. So it feels like you're punishing the army design by pricing runes twice, once in the hero and then once again in the units. Really, when you really should be only pricing, well, you shouldn't even be pricing the rune system. You should just be pricing the units and what they do on the table. And I just don't think like this was a good approach points wise. All these units are too expensive. Even the Spirit of the Wind and like the Spirit of the Mountains, they're too expensive, guys. Like, I've seen like the idea of like running like the cow list, and it's gonna look super cool on the table, but man, like hitting on 4s for a unit that like pays that many points, like I don't know, man. Like, I don't know. Like, you're not a Gargant. Like, you're not a Gargant. You don't have the durability of a Gargant. You don't have the OC of a Gargant. You don't have the move speed of a Gargant. But like, you're basically paying Gargant price for Gargant output. I mean, not quite, but still, like, you get the point. Like, all these units are too expensive. Also, too many of these mechanics are like once per army, so you can't even like really double up on them. So I don't know, guys. Like, I love the book. I think they got scared with like the points and the rune. The rune system is super interesting, super fun. Is it super broken? If you're trying to do like I said, a Veneri list, not really. Is there somebody who's going to figure out how to make Lumineth broken in like a mono like temple list? Probably, or like a kind of a hybrid, but mostly temple list. I'd probably say it's going to be good. I don't know if it's going to be like broken. I mean, not to the level the current Zinch book is, but like is it better than Nurgle? I don't think so either. That's the other thing that makes me like kind of sad is it's probably better than most of the other tomes that came out before Nurgle. But since the change of direction, I don't think it's any better than Nurgle as a rule designer army. So I talked for an hour about this. I personally like. I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna play the army. It's just like that's not an issue. I was just highlighting like you know the fact that like it's so close. It's so close to be like not just like not broken, but just like it feels like the right balance. It's so close. Like I said, at 10%, 15% point drop or overall probably makes the army like feels good on the table. Here's my biggest concern with Lumineth. People are gonna be so excited to play it. They're gonna show up to tournaments with it, and they're gonna get 2 and 3 or 1 and 4 because the army just has no staying power in the first half. It also, the current battle plan system and battle tactics really do not benefit this type of like we'll call it like the hybrid like Lumineth army, which is like more like Veneri with like a bunch of temple units and like kind of plays up the center, and like it doesn't really it's just not gonna do well on these like missions. It's just like the stack is a little rough. Like you kind of get stuck of like probably taking Restless, which is the best battle tactic up half, but like it still requires you to get to your opponent's table half, and you still need to be able to push through their army to do that. And like the Lumineth list army right now doesn't feel like it just jams. It feels like it wants to grind out games in the later half to do that. So like that's the issue. It's like all of but you're only doing it with a third less wounds than your opponent's army. Um, there will be people who are like, oh man, this rune system is so powerful. Look, it's turn 3. My opponent is a 5-up ward with -1 to be hit and all these like defensive mechanics. I'm like, yeah, but did you charge them on turn 1? Because they don't do shit. They dive so fast on turn 1. Like not all armies can obviously do that, but like there's a moment of truth to the fact that like this army can't really handle early board pressure. And there is a lot of armies in the game right now which like provide early board pressure to the extent so that they have a natural gatekeeper into performing. And once the army gets played enough, where people pick up on like how the army plays, like I said, it's gonna be like either like you're gonna get attacked immediately out of the gate, or you're going to get shot off the gate table, or you're going to, because like a lot of the monsters, like the heroes that matter are like unobscurable. Like Teclis, the cows, Severith. By the way, Severith losing his defensive mechanic from shooting is a massive blow to him. Like he basically dies to anything in your table now that has like decent shooting. So like, yeah, like it's just like it like the book wants you to play. I'll be honest, like I feel like the rules designer also kind of like are punishing the army even more by forcing the rune system. Like if you're trying to create a balanced list, you're still constrained for the most part to assigning the runes to 2 units only, and mostly to 2 units, and like that is like forces your list archetype to like. That's why Blade Lords are interesting, because you for 600 points you get 2 units, and like you're like, okay, that's the 2 units I'm gonna pick for my runes. That's what it's gonna be, because that's just like they do the most on the table in terms of at least like output and defensively, because you can at least like the turns where like I don't want to give them the 5-up ward from the rune, and as long as they have a scenario hero nearby, they get a 5-up ward, and you don't have to depend on the spell, like, because there's a lot of situation like if you're depending on the spell to go off and you have to make the decision of the rune before you cast, it's pretty rough. Like you're like, if you're assuming I'm taking this rune because I got a bank on me making that spell for the 5-up ward, it's just that's not a winning strategy. It's a gamble for sure, but it's not a winning like tactic. It's not a repeat thing. You can just take the gamble on over and over and over again. It will put you like, yeah. So I mean, I'm harping a lot on this, but yeah, I love the rune system. I just wish they changed the way that it is assigned to units. Just give it doesn't matter which ones you've picked, just be based on the number of runes in the scripture, and then give it to X units +1. That's it. Like literally that's the only change. And that change makes the army a lot more interesting, where like you can basically, it doesn't matter if you're going for like kind of like the Super Saiyan rune, you don't get punished for basically going for that and only being affecting like 2 units at a time. And the whole time I'm like, before I started recording this, I assumed the Caligrave was once per battle round. The fact that it's once per battle actually really hits that on the nose, because at least the Caligrave, when it was once per battle round and you're trying to go for the spread rune, you still only get limited to 2 units per time you pick a rune, but at least it felt that like you had a way, like you could keep picking the 5-up ward. Like let's say in a world where you're like, I'm not going to depend on the spell, I'm going to keep picking the 5-up ward rune because I have 2 units I want to buff and I've designed my list around these 2 units, but I still want to go for the Super Saiyan rune. I'm going to keep picking the 5-up ward rune and then switching it every turn, the previous rune, to something else. At least there was a way to achieve that. I think currently right now there is no way to achieve that because of how they've designed the rune system. And maybe that is by design and that's what they want you to do. But it unfortunately feels like, because these, like I said, like you're so shoehorned in so few units, which at phase, you're probably, when you're going to design list, you're going to realize you have like 6 to 7 units on the table at most of Lumineth, and you're going to be only able to buff 2 at a time. It doesn't feel like that much of a problem, but mechanically speaking, it's just from like that's a byproduct of 2 issues: the fact that the units cost too much and the rune system is too punishing. In reality, Lumineth list should be closer to 10 and 11 units on the table to be, I would arguably say, comfortably competitive in the format, but they can't right now. So, and then the rune system, like if once you get to 10 or 11 units, the rune system, when you're assigning it to 2, is just feels bad. Like it just feels bad. Like I would prefer if I could run MSU. Like I think MSU, like in the current points, MSU Lumineth is probably like a lot more interesting at like having a pathway to win on the missions. But because the rune system is existing, it's almost like it disincentivizes you from being MSU. And that's, I think, like once again another like kind of like fatal flaw in the design. Maybe like I said, maybe this book is designed for the next edition or next GHB, and that will be solved. But right now it's not, and it comes in this environment, and I think that the army's good. The all the mechanics are there except maybe for the Veneri issues, but like it's there. It just needs either point adjustments or slight tweaks, right? So anyway, I'm now gone on 70 minutes, so I probably should take a break. Thank you for maybe listening to this odd video. I want to do one on Tzeentch, but I am not an expert on Tzeentch. I just know based on my cursory look through, the army is fucking really good and maybe arguably maybe busted. I will do one on Nurgle because I think it is one of the best book they've like printed in this edition. Like arguably the most entertaining list design, entertaining army to play. The power's there now without like losing any identity. It's one of the best book they printed. So I'll probably do one on Nurgle. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a lovely rest of your week.